I think that I've now, at 63 years old, suddenly owned that it's not a bad thing to speak your voice.
Nobody expected Sarah Ferguson to be the one holding the match. For years, Fergie had played the role of the disgraced but loyal ex-wife, standing by Prince Andrew through scandal after scandal, defending him when the rest of the world had written him off. But something shifted. Something broke. And when Fergie finally decided she'd had enough of protecting people who never protected her, the photograph she released didn't just shake the royal family. It detonated what was left of Prince Andrew's reputation and exposed a connection to Meghan Markle that both of them had spent years desperately trying to bury. The photo itself was innocent enough at first glance, just people at a party, smiling for a camera. But when you knew the context, when you understood where that party was and who else was there, when you recognized the yacht in the background and remembered the timeline, innocent wasn't the word anyone would use. Explosive was more accurate. Career-ending was even better. And for Prince Andrew, already clinging to the last threads of royal relevance, this was the photograph that might finally sever his connection to the family forever. The photo had been sitting in Fergie's personal archive for over a decade. She'd taken it herself during one of those Mediterranean summers when the wealthy and powerful gathered on floating palaces to mix business with pleasure in ways they'd never admit publicly. Fergie had been there as Andrew's companion, back when their relationship still had some warmth to it, back before the full weight of his scandals had crushed whatever affection remained between them. She'd snapped dozens of photos that trip, casual documentation of a lifestyle that seemed glamorous at the time, but had aged into something far more sinister, given everything the world now knew about who Andrew associated with and what those associations meant. Most of those photos had stayed buried in old hard drives and forgotten cloud accounts. But this one, the one with Meghan Markle standing just a bit too close to Andrew, both of them holding drinks and laughing like old friends, this one Fergie had held on to for a reason. According to sources close to Sarah Ferguson, the decision to release the photograph wasn't impulsive. It was calculated, strategic, the culmination of years of feeling used and discarded by people who'd benefited from her silence. Fergie had watched Meghan Markle enter the royal family, charm her way into Harry's heart, and then systematically distance herself from anyone she deemed beneath her new status. That apparently included Fergie, who tried multiple times to build a connection with Meghan during those early royal days. Insiders say Meghan had been cold, dismissive, treating Fergie like a cautionary tale rather than family. The snubs weren't dramatic, just the small cuts that add up over time. The unreturned messages, the declined invitations, the way Meghan would somehow always be unavailable when Fergie tried to offer advice about navigating royal life as an outsider. And then, most insulting of all, watching Meghan go on Oprah and paint herself as the victim of a cruel institution while conveniently forgetting that others had walked that same difficult path before her. But the final straw wasn't about Meghan at all. It was about Andrew. For years, Fergie had stood by him, defended him, provided him cover and companionship, even as his reputation crumbled. She'd done it out of some complicated mix of loyalty, habit, and genuine care for the father of her daughters. But Andrew, in typical fashion, had taken that loyalty for granted. When he needed her, she was supposed to be available. When she needed support, financial or otherwise, he was conveniently unable to help. The palace had made it clear that Andrew was radioactive, and anyone too close to him would share that contamination. Fergie had paid that price. She'd lost opportunities, endorsements, social standing, all because she wouldn't cut ties completely. And Andrew's gratitude for that sacrifice? Minimal at best. So when Fergie finally decided to stop protecting everyone else and start protecting herself, the photograph of Andrew and Meghan became her insurance policy and her revenge all in one perfectly timed release. The photo went public through channels that gave Fergie plausible deniability while ensuring maximum impact. It didn't leak to tabloids first. It appeared on a royal watching blog run by someone with impeccable sources, posted with just enough context to make the implications clear without making direct accusations. The blog post noted the date the photo was taken, cross-referenced it with known yacht parties from that period, pointed out that both Andrew and Meghan had denied socializing together before her relationship with Harry, and then simply asked readers to draw their own conclusions. Within an hour, it had been screenshotted and shared across every social media platform. Within 3 hours, major news outlets were reporting on its existence, even if they weren't publishing the image themselves. And within 6 hours, Prince Andrew's phone was exploding with panic calls from what remained of his legal and PR team. Andrew's initial reaction, according to palace insiders, was pure rage. Not the calculated anger of someone who knows they need to be strategic, but the hot fury of someone who feels betrayed by the one person who was supposed to remain loyal no matter what. He apparently tried calling Fergie immediately, but she didn't answer. He sent texts that went unanswered. He even showed up at Royal Lodge, where she'd been staying in a separate wing, only to find she'd left earlier that morning for a previously unannounced trip. She'd made herself unreachable at the exact moment Andrew needed to contain the damage. And that wasn't an accident. Fergie had planned this carefully, releasing the photo and then disappearing so Andrew couldn't pressure her into walking it back or claiming it was released without her knowledge. She wanted him to feel what she'd felt for years, helpless and exposed, with no one willing to throw her a lifeline. The photograph's impact on Meghan Markle was immediate and devastating. Her entire defense against the yacht girl allegations had rested on the claim that she'd never socialized in those circles, that the rumors were misogynistic fabrications designed to slut-shame a successful woman. But here was visual proof that she'd been exactly where the rumors said she'd been, photographed with exactly the person she claimed not to know. Her PR team went into overdrive trying to control the narrative, releasing statements about how attending a party doesn't mean anything inappropriate happened, how successful people network at events all the time, how the photo was being deliberately misinterpreted by people with an agenda. But the statements felt desperate because they were avoiding the central issue. She'd said she'd never socialized with Andrew. The photo proved that was a lie. And if she'd lied about that, what else had she lied about? Prince Harry's reaction to seeing the photo was reportedly even more intense than his response to previous revelations about Meghan's past. This wasn't some anonymous allegation he could dismiss. This was a photograph, undeniable proof, and it came with the added sting of knowing Fergie had been sitting on it for years. Harry had to process multiple betrayals at once. Meghan had lied to him again. Fergie, family despite everything, had chosen to expose that lie publicly rather than giving him a heads up privately. And Andrew, his own uncle, had apparently socialized with Meghan and never mentioned it, even as Harry grew more isolated from his family, defending her. The web of deception felt suffocating. Sources close to Harry said he spent hours just walking the grounds of his Montecito property, faux and off, trying to make sense of how everyone in his life seemed to have been lying to him. Back in England, the palace was dealing with its own crisis. King Charles had already pushed Andrew to the furthest margins of royal life possible without completely severing ties. Andrew had been stripped of military titles, removed from public duties, essentially erased from the working monarchy. But he was still the king's brother, still living in royal properties, still receiving financial support from the family. The photograph reignited calls for Charles to go further, to completely cut Andrew off, to force him out of Royal Lodge and end any appearance of royal protection. But Charles faced a delicate balance. Go too hard on Andrew, and it looks like the monarchy is throwing family members away the moment they become inconvenient. Go too soft, and it looks like the institution protects predators and their associates. Either way, he couldn't win. And now Meghan was tangled up in it too, which meant Harry was involved, which meant any move Charles made would be seen through the lens of the ongoing family rift. Prince Andrew's anger turned from Fergie to Meghan as the full implications of the photo sank in. According to sources, Andrew felt that Meghan had used him. Back when that photo was taken, she'd been an ambitious actress, networking aggressively to build connections and advance her career. Andrew, despite his many flaws, still carried the prince title and the social access that came with it. Meghan had apparently been charming and attentive at that party, exactly the kind of behavior Andrew responded to. He'd probably helped facilitate introductions, open doors, done the things that powerful men do for attractive women at these events, without thinking too much about the implications. And now, years later, that brief association was being used to destroy what little reputation he had left. From Andrew's perspective, he was being punished for something that was barely memorable to him, a casual interaction at a party he'd attended dozens of weaponized by a woman who'd gone on to marry his nephew and trash his family.
The question of what exactly happened at that yacht party became the subject of intense speculation online. Royal watchers and internet sleuths started piecing together everything they could find about that event. Who else was there, what the party was supposedly celebrating, which controversial figures had been in attendance. The more details that emerged, the worse it looked for everyone involved. This wasn't some innocent cocktail party or charity gala. This was one of those exclusive gatherings where the guest list read like a who's who of people you wouldn't want to be associated with in retrospect. The kind of event where people showed up, saw who else was there, and made mental notes to deny attending if anyone ever asked. Meghan had been photographed smiling in that environment, apparently comfortable, apparently enjoying herself. That image was impossible to square with the humanitarian, socially conscious brand she'd built in recent years. Fergie, meanwhile, had gone completely silent. After dropping the photographic bomb, she'd vanished from public view. No interviews, no statements, no social media activity, just silence that spoke louder than any explanation could have. Royal commentators debated whether she'd gone too far or finally stood up for herself. Public opinion was surprisingly split. Some saw her as a vindictive ex-wife lashing out at people who'd moved on without her. Others saw her as a woman who'd been used and abused by the royal system, finally fighting back with the only weapon she had. The truth was probably somewhere in between. Fergie had her own agenda, her own grievances, her own desire for relevance in a world that had largely forgotten about her. But that didn't mean the photograph was fake or the implications weren't real. Sometimes messy motivations can still expose uncomfortable truths. The legal implications of the photograph started becoming apparent as lawyers for various parties began weighing in. Could Meghan sue for invasion of privacy? Difficult, since she was photographed at what appeared to be a semi-public event years ago. Could she claim defamation? Only if she could prove the photo or the context around it was deliberately false, which seemed impossible given that the image appeared authentic and the timeline matched known events. Could Andrew take action against Fergie for releasing a private photo? Maybe, but that would require admitting the photo was real and he was there, which opened up more questions than it answered. The legal reality was that everyone was trapped by the truth. The photo existed. It showed what it showed, and no amount of legal maneuvering could make people unsee it or stop asking questions about what it meant. Inside the royal family, the photograph opened old wounds that had never properly healed. Prince William, who'd been vindicated in his early concerns about Meghan, felt no satisfaction in being proven right. He'd wanted to be wrong. He'd wanted his brother's marriage to work out, wanted Meghan to be the person Harry believed she was. The photograph was just more evidence that the family rift was based on something real, not just jealousy or racism as Meghan had claimed. Princess Anne, known for her blunt assessments, reportedly told Charles that the photograph proved what she'd been saying for years, that both Andrew and the Sussexes needed to be cut loose completely before they did any more damage to the institution. But Charles resisted that advice, still hoping somehow that family relationships could be preserved, even as the evidence mounted that maybe some relationships were too toxic to save. The financial consequences for Prince Andrew hit almost immediately. What little income he'd cobbled together from various sources began evaporating as anyone associated with him ran for cover. Businesses that had quietly maintained connections suddenly discovered pressing reasons to sever those ties. Invitations to private events, even from friends who'd stuck by him through previous scandals,
dried up completely. The photograph had moved him from radioactive to completely untouchable. And the most painful part for Andrew was realizing he'd done it to himself by not being honest from the start. If he'd simply admitted years ago that, yes, he'd met Meghan socially before she dated Harry, it would have been a footnote. But by denying it, by forcing everyone to lie on his behalf, he turned it into a scandal that destroyed his last shred of credibility. Meghan's Hollywood comeback, which had been struggling even before the photographs surfaced, was now completely dead. The movie she'd been attached to officially announced she was no longer part of the project due to creative differences, the industry's polite way of saying, "We can't be associated with you anymore." Streaming services that had been considering projects quietly passed. Brand partnerships evaporated. The photograph hadn't just damaged her reputation, it had made her uninsurable from a PR perspective. No company wanted to invest millions in a project or campaign only to have more photos surface, more denials collapse, more questions raised about who she really was and what she really done before becoming a duchess. The most tragic figure in all of this might have been Prince Harry. He'd given up everything based on Meghan's version of events. He'd defended her against every accusation, cut off anyone who questioned her, burned bridges he could never rebuild. And now, photograph after photograph, revelation after revelation, was proving that maybe the people who'd questioned her had valid reasons. Harry was trapped in an impossible position. Admitting Meghan had deceived him meant admitting he'd thrown away his family, his country, and his role for a lie. Staying with her meant continuing to defend the indefensible while more evidence mounted. Either choice led to a kind of destruction. The only question was which destruction he could live with. Prince Andrew's anger at Fergie crystallized into something colder and more calculating. According to sources, he began compiling his own archive of information about Fergie's past, her own questionable associations, her own financial scandals. If she wanted to play the exposure game, he had ammunition too. But his advisors warned him that mutual destruction benefited no one, least of all him. Fergie was already at rock bottom in terms of reputation. She had nothing left to lose. Andrew, despite everything, still had his titles, his place in the line of succession, his royal residence. Starting a war with Fergie risked losing even those last vestiges of his former life. The smartest move was silence. Riding out the storm, hoping another scandal would eventually replace this one in the public consciousness. But Andrew had never been good at smart moves, and his ego couldn't tolerate the idea of Fergie getting away with humiliating him. The photograph sparked a broader conversation about the culture of those yacht parties and the wealthy elite who attended them. Investigative journalists started digging into who hosted these events, who funded them, what kind of business got conducted under the cover of social gatherings. Names started emerging of other celebrities and public figures who'd been present at similar parties, creating a secondary wave of scandal as people scrambled to distance themselves from that entire scene. Meghan and Andrew were just two names in a much larger ecosystem of questionable behavior and associations. But they were the most prominent names, the ones that carried the most symbolic weight. A prince and a duchess connected through a photograph that neither could explain away, representing everything the public had started to suspect about how the elite really operated. The palace communication strategy, such as it was, centered on trying to separate Meghan's scandal from the institution itself. Palace sources began quietly briefing friendly journalists that the concerns about Meghan had been raised internally from the beginning, that due diligence had been done, that the family had tried to protect Harry even as he refused to listen. It was a subtle campaign to shift the narrative from the palace drove Meghan out to Meghan deceived everyone, including the palace. The goal was to insulate the working royals from the Sussex fallout while letting Harry and Meghan twist in the wind they'd created. Brutal, perhaps, but effective. Public opinion was shifting towards sympathy for William and Charles, seeing them as the wronged parties who'd been smeared in the press for trying to protect family and institution from someone who'd turned out to be exactly what they feared.
Fergie's silence continued, and with each passing day, it became clearer that she wasn't going to apologize or walk back the photograph. She'd made her move and was living with the consequences, whatever they might be. Some speculated she'd written a book deal into the scandal, planning to cash in on her story of being the royal family's scapegoat. Others thought she'd simply reached a breaking point where revenge mattered more than future relationships. Either way, the photograph was out there permanently, saved and shared millions of times, impossible to erase from the historical record. Fergie had ensured that whatever else happened, people would remember she'd been the one brave or crazy enough to finally expose what everyone had whispered about for years. Prince Andrew's rage eventually gave way to resignation. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that his royal life was truly over. Not temporarily suspended pending some future rehabilitation, but permanently finished. The photograph was the final nail in a coffin that had been built scandal by scandal over years. There would be no comeback, no redemption arc, no moment where the public forgave and forgot. He'd be forever known as the disgraced prince whose associations destroyed his reputation, and now that reputation had infected everyone connected to him, including his nephew's wife. The best he could hope for was to live quietly, stay out of the headlines, and let time slowly fade the intensity of public interest. But even that modest goal seemed impossible given how completely the photograph had reignited interest in his worst moments. For Meghan Markle, the photograph represented a reckoning she'd managed to avoid for years. Her carefully constructed narrative about being victimized by a racist institution and malicious media was crumbling under the weight of actual evidence. People who defended her were reconsidering. Media outlets that had been sympathetic were asking harder questions. And most devastating, her husband was finally starting to wonder if the people warning him about her had been right all along. She could survive bad press. She could survive failed business deals. She could even survive being snubbed by Hollywood. But surviving the loss of Harry's blind faith? That was the one thing her brand absolutely required, and the photograph had cracked that foundation in ways that might be impossible to repair. The ultimate irony was that the photograph by itself didn't actually show anything scandalous happening. There was no smoking gun, no criminal behavior captured on camera, just two people at a party, smiling and talking. But context is everything. The lies about never being there, the denials that they'd socialized, the broader pattern of deception around Meghan's past and Andrew's associations, that's what made the image explosive. It wasn't what the photograph showed, it was what it proved. That both of them had been lying. That the warnings about Meghan's history had merit. That Andrew's claims of being unfairly targeted were undermined by his own choices. Sometimes the most damaging evidence is simply proof that someone isn't who they claim to be. As weeks passed and the photograph remained the dominant story in royal circles, the various parties involved settled into their new realities. Andrew retreated further into isolation, his anger at Fergie hardening into permanent estrangement. Meghan doubled down on victimhood, her PR machine working overtime to frame the photo as more evidence of coordinated attacks, rather than legitimate questions about her honesty. Harry withdrew into himself, caught between loyalty to his wife and growing doubts he couldn't entirely suppress. And Fergie, the unlikely bomb thrower, maintained her silence while reportedly working on projects that suggested she was quite comfortable with her choice to expose the truth, regardless of who it hurt. The photograph that Fergie released didn't just expose one moment at one party years ago. It exposed the fragility of carefully constructed public images, the danger of defending people without knowing their full truth, and the reality that in the age of smartphones and digital archives, nothing stays buried forever. For Prince Andrew, it was the final humiliation in a series of self-inflicted wounds. For Meghan Markle, it was evidence that her past would always chase her present. For Prince Harry, it was another crack in his faith that this had all been worth it.
And for the royal family, it was a reminder that sometimes the greatest threats come from within, from family members who know exactly where the bodies are buried because they helped bury them. The photograph would remain a defining image of this era of royal history, the moment when Fergie's revenge became everyone's reckoning.